you of the opinion that that could happen in St. Louis County as well?
Yes, so the Board of Aldermen can pass local ordinances. And so we have a public safety council excuse me, that regulates police behavior in the city that can address these problems. So yes, I am of the opinion that we don't have to go all the way to the Supreme Court or go to Jeff City to change those local ordinances and address the problem on a local level. No.
And also, in St. Louis County, many of those governments are charter governments. So you can go and start this process via the charter system.
Questions from any other commissioners? Seeing that, I just want to ask one quick question in the spirit of accountability, with thanks to Ms. Gorman and to Professor Hansford. You gave us two letters from Stephen Hawkins of Amnesty International USA, one to Chief Jackson, the other to Chief Dotson. You noted that Chief Dotson did not respond. You didn't know whether Chief Jackson responded. Did Chief Jackson respond to the letter?
No one from Ferguson responded.
Okay. Respectfully, in the spirit of accountability, I'd just like to go on the record to invite Chief Dotson and Chief Jackson and join my voice with those who have signed this letter, Stephen Hawkins of Amnesty International and others, and on the record invite a response from Chief Jackson and to Chief Dotson to the letter dated August 12, 2014, and invite them to respond with copy to me, if not the commission, before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to ask, any other questions? Okay, we're going to ask Director Isom to return to build on your questions and comments about training and training standards.
Now, one last statement. One last quick statement. Josh here, who also is someone who's been out there all the time, wanted to make a quick statement he asked me to make. And Josh, you want to make a quick statement here? Go ahead, Josh.
How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Ooh, that was, come on, how y'all doing? Okay, that's good job. All right, so as a protester on the ground in Ferguson, we experience lots of things in Ferguson, okay? We shouldn't have to be walking down the street and get stopped on the street and frisked like this, because as African American walking on the streets, that's hard. Like you could be going to a meeting. They interrupting your time right now. So you shouldn't be, you could be able to walk in the store and don't get followed around the store like you're going to steal something. So what we are asking is we need equal rights in Ferguson. We need equal rights in America, for real. It's not about blacks, it's about blacks and whites. Yeah, we say Black Lives Matter. You know, all lives matter. That's right. That's right. All lives do matter. On the beginning of Mike Brown murder, we took West Florissant and protested. We had kids out there getting tear gas. That shouldn't happen. Kids out there getting tear gas and shot at.
In the daylight.
When the police go out there in their little uniforms, they don't see nothing but thugs. All they see is targets in the streets that they shoot of. And as a baby growing up in Ferguson, they shouldn't have to experience that. They shouldn't have to experience tear gas in their system. We got pregnant women out there getting tear gas.
Elderly women and
We got elderly women out there getting tear gas. We shouldn't have to walk down the street and get shot at. Mike Brown was about to go to college that next day, but an officer who got a trigger-happy finger shot him dead in the streets of Canfield. And now he is resting in heaven instead of getting his education in college. We shouldn't have that. We shouldn't have him laying on the street for 4.5 hours in the 90-degree weather.
didn't get justice.
And then After that, what made it worse, the cop that killed him is still on the loose. No indictment.
Another killer cop on the loose.
Another killer cop is on the loose. That means he's gonna find his next victim and shoot him dead in the street. I shouldn't have to, right, I shouldn't have to sit next to Bondeg's mother and she crying her eyes out because her son dead, shot by city police. 6 times in the back for walking up the hill with a sandwich. Really? We shouldn't have to do that. And then if us make that worse, his cop killer gonna run free. We're not gonna keep standing for this. We're gonna stand up for our race.
Stick together.
We're gonna stand up for what's right in America. We're gonna tell the police that they ain't right to keep killing our black kids down. We're gonna tell them that we demand them to step down to a lower level. Because you have no right to shoot me dead. Because I got an education, I got family. And I will like to return home to my family without getting shot dead in the street.
Thanks, Josh.
And I will be out here every day until we get justice for our black people. Yeah. Until I get justice for my black people. Until I get justice for my white people. Okay? So,
thanks, Josh.
if we don't get justice, no justice?
No peace.
No justice? No justice?
I want to say thank you. Want to express our thanks for all of our guests. So we want to thank all of our guests. We want to thank Chief Dotson for being with us. We want to thank Justin, Shiraz, and Josh, all for sharing with us. I want to thank all of you who have been a part of that discussion. The couple of things we want to transition. So we've heard perspectives. We also need to hear about where some of these things can be changed. So in the state of Missouri, we have these the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission that is staffed by the Director of Public Safety. We're going to hear a little bit about that process from Chief Isom now, and then we're going to break out into some discussions to hear about these specific issues from you around specifically use of force, racial profiling, and community policing. So let's hear about one of the structures that can actually do something about these issues from Chief Isom. Commissioner Isom.
So it's clear that there is a fracture in terms of relationships with the community and the police. We're in this space right now because that relationship is not what we want it to be. At the last commission meeting, a young man got up and said that his mother said he had 2 strikes against him. One was being black, and the other was being male. In America, there shouldn't be a parent who has that discussion with their child. We have use of force cases that have been called into question. People are protesting, people are angry. We have a Ferguson Police Department that is not representative of its community. So the question is, what can we do about it? So the Police Officer Standards and Training Commission, which is under the Director of Public Safety, is responsible for standards for all law enforcement agencies in the state of Missouri. So I'm going to be real brief because I know you all have listened to us too much and we want to get to the public comment. But every police officer must go through 600 hours of training. What I will tell you about that training is that it's heavy on legal issues, heavy on technical issues, heavy on skill development, and very, very light on interpersonal relations. If you look at the website, you will be able to see the breakdown in the core structure for all police officers. What I'm proposing to you as a community is we need to be much more heavy in terms of training and how we relate to each other as opposed to how we lock people up, right? So you'll be able to look at that, the 600 hours of training, and see where things like communication, interpersonal skills, community relations is not the heavy focus of the training. And so that's the area we need to focus on as a community. Each officer in the state of Missouri must have 48 hours of continuing education every 3 years, every 3 years. I'm not going to even go through the slide. Once again, that's not a lot of training. 48 hours is basically a week worth of training every 3 years, right? It's up to each law enforcement agency to decide what the training is going to be and how that is set up. You have training in technical skills, which could be how you patrol a neighborhood, legal skills. Professor Hansford talked about Tennessee versus Garner. Updates like that are given to officers. And then 4 hours in skill development, which is shooting. 4 hours in interpersonal skills, okay? So those are opportunities where we could provide more training to officers. We could provide more leadership and more direction on what the community wants officers to be trained in. This is just a simple overview. This presentation will be posted on our website. The basic training courses and breakdown of curriculum is on there. And then also very specifically in those interpersonal skills, which is only about 24 hours of basic training, we have a breakdown of what those courses look like. I would ask you to go on and review this, because this is where we can have some quick wins for the community and for the Ferguson Commission. How do we want our officers in the state of Missouri to be trained? What is the direction we want to go in? So I invite you to look at that, and hopefully we can have some conversation on how we can be more progressive in Missouri about training police officers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca. Oh, any questions?
Are there questions from commissioners? Yes, Gabe?
Chief Isom, I have a question. This has obviously been a topic that's been in the news a lot lately, and I've seen a fair amount of commentary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've seen a fair amount of commentary suggesting that one of the leading causes of these use of force encounters where it comes to the use of deadly force is poor tactics by the police officers. That's a lot of time what leads to the situation where you have the encounter that results in the use of deadly force. And I hear what you're saying about there needs to be emphasis on the community relations training and those types of things. But I'm just interested to hear your thoughts about to what degree do you think that the better use of tactics and better training in that area would also reduce these incidences?
So it's proven that better tactics can de-escalate situations. There are two issues in terms of tactics. It starts with communication. If you look at the training standards, the 600 hours of training standards, it talks about tactical communications. All of us know that through communication, you can de-escalate situations. Depending on how you approach a person, oftentimes it's depending on what their reaction will be, right? So communication is a big part of that first step in that process. But beyond that, tactics involve giving yourself space and time to make better decisions. Space and time. And so oftentimes, both from the citizen standpoint and the officer standpoint, if you have better tactics, it gives the officer sometimes time to make other decisions about what type of force that person is going to use, right? So if, in fact, we have a situation, I'll give you an example, where you're pursuing a person and they're running and they run through a gangway. For the officer's safety, you would expect that they would pause before they run through that gangway. As you run through the gangway, you're running through a tunnel, right? And exposes you to a threat. So if you wait for that person to clear that gangway, it helps you to make a decision on whether you want to use lethal force or not. If you come into that gangway at the same time, you really don't have an option, right? Once a person turns. So tactics give officers time and space to make better decisions. So yes, training can help reduce lethal force encounters. And that's been proven.
Other questions from commissioners? Okay, I have one. So to capsulize, the Police Officer Standards Training Board has the authority to change the mix of this 600 hours. Does it have the authority to increase the 600 hours?
So it has the authority to change the mix of the 600 hours. It doesn't have the authority to increase the 600 hours. That would be a legislative change. So if the community went to the legislators and said, we believe that officers ought to do 1,000 hours of training, it could be increased. Now, what I would suggest to you is that most police departments, including St. Louis Police Department and St. Louis County, do more than 600 hours worth of training. Now, they decide what that additional 400 hours will be within their respective police departments. But most police departments do more than 600.
And does the Standards Board have the ability to require ongoing training more frequently than the 48 hours every 3 years?
So statutorily, it's 48 hours. So you could not increase that without legislative changes. However, the Post Commission does have the authority to be more specific about what that training should be. So there are 16 hours that must come from skill development, legal skills, interpersonal relations, technical skills. 32 hours are electives. So we could be more specific about what those electives are.
But you could not, without a statutory change, require more?
We could not require more.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yes, question from Brittany.
So this kind of builds on that. Are there any departments that incentivize additional training if an officer wants to opt into it? Is that a practice that you've ever seen before?
Incentivize in what way do you mean?
Meaning, right, you might get a bonus or some other kind of incentive for saying, I'm going to opt into engaging in additional training.
Right. So most police departments, if you continue your education, St. Louis Police Department is one. They actually pay for additional education, so a tuition reimbursement program. They also give you additional pay for a bachelor's, master's, PhD. But most police departments provide these elective courses that officers can take if they want to, so additional courses. But it's only mandatory that 48 hours from a state perspective. It may be mandatory to take more from each individual police department, but the 48 hours is a state mandate.
Chief, just to be clear again, back to Rich's point, the 600 is set by the General Assembly. The 48 is set by the General Assembly. Yes. At your level, you can change the makeup of those hours within that. And if we wanted to have it make a recommendation to go over, you'd have to go to the General Assembly. However, the Chief of Police in the districts, they could voluntarily
Yes.
add more hours.
Yes.
Is that all true?
That's all true.
Okay.
And you could
Thank
also
you.
have a differentiation, so if in the St. Louis area we wanted to have higher requirements for training, we could ask the General Assembly to differentiate.
Right, so no one issues the Class B license, I think, anymore, but there's a Class A and a Class B license. The Class A license is 600 hours. All police academies are doing the 600 hours now. So yeah, we could do that with the legislature.
Questions from others in the commission?
I just have another question. We're hearing a lot of conversations, certainly reading in the press. I don't know what the right word here is, but kind of the disparity in the training, right, depending on the side of the police officer. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that, how training works in smaller places, and is that accurate?
Well, you know, here's the problem is that when you talk about training, it depends on the person who's providing the training, it depends on the agency, and so the Post Commission allows police departments to do their own individual training. Now, they must oftentimes submit proposals to the Post Commission about what that training is, but as you might imagine, it's varying degrees of valuable training. It's safe to say that smaller agencies do not have the resources to provide some of the training that larger agencies do. And so we really don't know what the quality of that training is oftentimes.
Chief, I have a question. Would it make sense to have a uniform training standard and curriculum delivered by an agency or committee of the Post Commission so that we would know and understand exactly what the training is, what's being delivered, and what all police officers are getting? Is that reasonable?
Well, I mean, that's what the purpose of the Basic 600 was for the state to give some guidance in terms of what is needed for a basic level of training for police officers. Now, we might say that more is needed, that we need to give more guidance. We need to give 1,000 hours of training that is consistent across the state. And I might suggest that might be true, that we need to do that. But that would take a statutory change to say we need to move it from 600 hours to 1,100, 1,200, and then the work in terms of filling the gaps would be done by the Post Commission. What should that additional 400 hours be? Now, I will say that every community is different, and so there is going to be some need for flexibility. The ordinances in St. Louis are not the same as the ordinances in Ferguson or Baldwin or other communities. So there does need to be some flexibility in how that's delivered from community to community. I do think we could get more specific in the continuing education realm, especially as it's related to things like community policing, racial profiling. What do we want that to look like? What do we want our police departments to learn in those areas, in that area of interpersonal skills? Right. 48 hours in 3 years.
Good. I want to thank Commissioner Isom for his leadership and the moderation of this discussion that we have had, and for the work that he has done in identifying some of the areas that could be changed, and as he said, some areas of potential quick responses, some areas where we may get some early traction and response to community concerns as it relates to police training. Co-Chair McClure and I have spoken with Commissioner Isom and asked him to lead a small working group to identify what some of these changes could be, and to report back to the commission as they are prepared. As you have heard, there are some options here that can be responsive to the community's concerns. Some of them may require longer-term work, but there may be some immediate alterations that could be made within the Post Commission. So we invite him to prepare those to report back to the commission as he is ready, and to bring together a group of experts and community members as appropriate to engage in that dialogue and bring those recommendations back.
Just to put a quick exclamation point for the commission and for the audience, I think it was clear, but just to reinforce it, Commissioner Isom, Director Isom, in his role as a state official relating to the Police Officer Standards Training Board, has the ability to make changes within the statute. So he can change things in the 600 hours, he can change in the 48. we may very well, and he may come back to us, and we may together say that's clearly inadequate to have, we need more training, but he has executive authority with the concurrence of the board to make some changes fairly quickly, and I think it will be our encouragement, and I believe hopefully his recommendation to do so.
That being said, thank you. With that being said, we're at a time, we're about 20 minutes behind our regular schedule, and we want to make sure that we get as much input on these critical issues as possible. And so we're going to hand the program back over to our facilitator, Ms. Rebecca Bennett, who will guide us into the next phase of our dialogue in a way that we can hear community input on very specific issues.
Thank you, Reverend Wilson. So what we want to do in probably the next 35 minutes or so is get a chance to hear from as many people as possible on the issues that you care about the most. We've got 3 stations around the room, and so one, if you'll look where my hand is pointing with the orange sheets on top, says community policing. We have, and Deion Ferguson, would you stand for me, please? She is the facilitator there. We have 2 questions. One is, what are your issues and concerns with regard to community policing? We've heard some of that from our presenters, but we want to hear it from you. And then the second is, what are your suggestions or recommendations for being able to make improvements? We don't want you to leave without also giving us your recommendations. If what you want to focus on this evening is use of force, then you will join Jessica Perkins. Jessica, will you stand and come back over here? And again, we'll be asking you to describe excessive use of force by law enforcement as you have experienced it, and we will be asking you to also talk about improvements, right, ways that we can do things differently. And then lastly, if you see the pink sheets over in the back, you can simply turn the chairs that way. The focus is on racial profiling. Again, we're asking about issues and we're asking about improvements, and you will be joining me. So we want to spend the next 35 minutes or so, if we've got that, to be able to have those discussions, to capture as much as possible. Again, it's not only a part of the record, it's a part of our thinking. So we've asked to hear from people in positions of authority and who have recognized expertise, but we also recognize that you have expertise and you have experience as well, and we want to capture that in the process. When we are done, we will ask each group to share with the whole what has come out of those group discussions, and the facilitators will see if there are community members who want to report out on behalf of the group to the body of the whole. So if you would now join me in going to one of our 3 corners with regard to the issue that you would like to speak on with greatest focus, and I will ask our commissioners to also join us in one of these 3 corners. Of hearing the wisdom that came out of the small groups. Even if you were not able to sit in that group, we still want you to be able to hear the ideas that were generated. So if you would, quiet down for a moment, please. We want to be able to have our groups report out, and we want to be able to have the commission conclude its business. All right. Again, I'd like to bring your attention back to the work of the commission. I hear lots of enthusiastic conversation. But we really want to be able to hear the insights that were generated in your small groups. So I had the benefit of working with the racial profiling group, and I'm going to let ask one of our participants if she would, in 2 minutes or less, be able to capture for you the insights that emerged from that group, and then we'll move to the use of force group, and then we'll move to the community policing group.
I'm Kiana Sewell, and we talked about racial profiling. And I wanted to start by saying that numerous members in our group explained their personal experiences being profiled and the personal impact that it has on their lives and their movement and the way that they feel viewed by the police and their community members. We noted that the profiling can often reflect stereotypes and misconceived ideas of crime, and that these techniques of profiling actually reinforce that through the data. So we talked about the fact that Dotson talked a lot about looking at quantitative data to see, focusing on community crime, how that could be related to practices, and we have to remember that that data is going to reflect practices as well. We had a nice and in-depth conversation about the economic consequences of racial profiling and how widespread those can be. Being targeted means that you carry an extra cost, but that cost can follow you throughout your life, throughout your attempts to do differently. Your attempts to pursue economic opportunities are hindered by being profiled. We talked about wanting to provide extra training, provide targeted training, specifically talking about anti-racist practices after screening for such ideologies. Talking about cultural sensitivity training so that one can work in communities that they may not be thoroughly familiar with without viewing those people in those communities as completely other from themselves. We also, let me make sure I'm covered. We talked about the racial profiling data as well. You can actually already see data on racial profiling, which is collected throughout all areas of Missouri on the Attorney General website, but this data has issues. It's population that it's compared to, so the stops in that community are tracked according to the officers taking it upon themselves to do what they're supposed to do and write down the correct information. But it's compared to the population of that community, that specific jurisdiction, which may not be the best population to compare it to, and that may be something that should be considered further. And also this data is simply presented, but there are not necessarily practice or policy implications drawn from it. I think that summarizes some of the things we talked about, but we really did talk about so many things, and I hope I did it a justice. Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome to read the comments yourselves as we leave the boards up. I want to hand it to Maureen Hanlon.
Excessive use of force. Okay, good evening, y'all. How are you? Okay, so what are the issues with excessive use of force? Number one, physical excessive force. So we're talking about retaliatory punishment for people. So people being sort of physically beaten up. We heard a couple of examples of that rather than getting a situation under control. We're talking about fear. We're talking intimidation tactics used by the police, beating the baton, coming out in riot gear, stopping people on the street, showing up, as if there's a riot. There's not a riot all the time. Fear of the police of citizens. So if we have these open carry laws, if we have these people carrying guns, are the police afraid of the citizens that they're policing? And then we also we talked about a lot of issues, y'all. That's harder to summarize. I think we just talked about a lot of tactics disproportionately affecting populations that are vulnerable. So we're talking about mentally ill citizens. We're talking about a practice of running warrant checks on people when they called the crime in. You call a crime in, someone runs a warrant check on you. So we're talking about targeting of specific populations, and that leads to excessive force. So what are some improvements? We talked about a lot of things again. Number one, increased community presence, residency requirements, programs to connect teens and police officers. Two, we're talking about crowd control. We're talking about general understanding of tactics to de-escalate force. And then number three, what we're talking about is enforcement. So we can come up with all the solutions we want, but if the only people that police the police are the police themselves, we are not going to get anywhere. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Diane Ferguson in community policing.
Thank you. Good evening. Our group was community policing, and one of the first things we did was to define it as community policing as the relationship between the community and the police, which is built on mutual respect. So we started there. Then we talked about some of the issues that some of our citizens are seeing that are not contributing to what community policing we believe should be. And those were community policing that the police are taught by other police, and that there needs to be expertise coming from the community so that the training that the officers are getting on engaging the community just does not come from the police only. Also, we talked about negative engagement by police. The first interaction with the police, oftentimes someone said that how police officers sometimes engage a person initially, if it was any other job, they would be fired based on how they approach a person. So we talked about one suggestion for improving that. Someone said to target the first 15 seconds between the police and civilian, and that should set the tone, and that tone should be a tone of respect. We also talked about the biases from the Police Officers Association, which helps to fuel the lack of engagement or positive engagement between the community and the police, and therefore deteriorates whatever community policing that might be there. In addition to that, we talked about citizens being stereotyped and there being divisions caused in neighborhoods by police performing what we term differential policing. And so we talked about addressing inherent racism is one of the major things that we talked about. And also, one other suggestion was police being required to walk the beat 50% of the time that they're on duty. Walk without arresting anyone. So simply engaging the citizens while you're walking, while the police officers are walking 50% of the time. And the last one that came up, which was interesting, and that one was that having the police officers who are in training to actually live in the community during their training. And so if they don't have a home in that community, then actually living with a particular household or community members within that community. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, community members, for giving us your thoughts and your insights. We have one more person who wanted to make a final comment for us about our process. We've been talking about our content, but he wanted to make a comment about our process.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Cage. I'm a resident of Ferguson, Missouri. Lived in Delaware for 13 years. But I'd like to address the issues about how we to make sure we could get these get the things that we spoke about put in place. And one of the things, like I heard everybody speaking about, was just the fact that our police departments need to fit our communities. And if our police departments don't fit our communities, we just got police officers just doing a 9 to 5 to go back to their house in Afton, South County, whatever. They have no clue who my son is, who your child is, who your friend is, or nothing like that. So, you know, like I was explaining to one of the people over here, you know, where I lived at, when the police officers kind of know their community, my son, when he was coming up, he kind of getting a little trouble sometime a little bit, little bitty kid stuff, but instead of them wanting to take him to juvenile, do stuff, they knew it would bring him home, talk to the parent, instead of just trying to, you know, just put them off somewhere. So the reason I'm saying that, because we need to diversify our communities more to a point that fits us, instead of just saying, we're going to put all these police officers over here. I want my son, your son, his son to be part of that police department, that fire department, those commissions up there, you know, the city council boards that work up there. We need some of our family members and people up there. The only way we do this, two things. We have to make sure we still exercise our right to vote, because I haven't heard no one in here really speak about that today. And that's one thing. If you really want change in your community, besides legislation, you go to the polls and vote. and you vote for change, for one. We don't hate police officers or nothing like that, but we don't want killer police cops out there killing our kids and killing our people. You can put badges on anybody. You can put a badge on anybody's body, but that don't mean that'll give them authority. That don't mean that they still won't go out and do what their hidden agendas are. Because we all know that we have police officers that represent not us, and they don't have no good intention for us. But like I said, I just wanted to I appreciate her giving me the microphone to speak to you all. Like I said, I will be back at all Sunday next meetings, but also I want to stress that at our next commission meeting, make sure we have a little bit more about the people instead of just the commission. Listen to us, because we the ones out here. Listen to us. You know, we heard all y'all talk, but we got very little time to speak what we wanted. That's why I was so hostile with her. So if you really, you want to know, don't ask them. I don't disrespect to the commission. Ask us, because this is what it's about. Ask us what we want. Ask us what's on our mind. Ask us what we need. And what kind of justice or injustice that we want taken up out of there or put back into place. So I just want to say thank you all for giving me the microphone. I could say a lot more, but I promised her it was going to be short. And everybody be safe, be peaceful out here. And hands up, don't shoot. No justice, no peace.
Thank you, Anthony. I want to thank all of you for your engagement, for your thoughts, for your patience, and for your care on tonight as we've entered into and really continued this dialogue. It has been our practice to begin with these devotional moments. In the last meeting, we closed with a prayer. But actually, what I want to do, if I could just have literally 30 seconds of your time, is just invite us to just a bit of silence for the sake of centering before we give kind of our concluding and transitioning remarks, if that's okay with you. Just a bit of silence. Thank you very much. Rich and I, as we've continued this work, do so, and we talk about it a lot in the spirit of gratitude to be able to do the work together. So I want to just note and express again our thanks to all of you for being here on today. Express thanks to those who reported for their groups and being a part of this process. Thanks to all of the commissioners, specifically today Commissioner Isom, for moderating our discussion on the peace officer standards and training, and beginning the discussion for us on this that the community has said was its primary issue. Also, I meant to do this ahead of time, but I did not. I want to thank Ms. Casper and invite you to send notes to Ms. Casper, to Dr. Small, the principal and assistant principal of Melanphy Botanical Garden School, and all the students here. For those who do not know, have not been in this space, 3-year-olds up through 5th graders study here and focus on this magnet environment. Students from all over our city come here and learn specifically about math and science with that great focus as one of our critical schools in this community, and they open their doors to us on today, and so we say thanks to them. And then finally, we say thank you to our guides and facilitators in this process, Ms. Rebecca Bennett, Ms. Dionne Ferguson, Ms. Jessica Perkins, and Ms. Lorna Godwin Hutchinson from Emerging Wisdom and Vector Communications for the skillful way that they are able to get all of our voices heard and out and to help to keep us on point to do this difficult work of listening and hearing one another. So we thank them for their guidance and for their leadership. As a couple of transition points around planning and administration, wanted to first remind you that we've asked Commissioner Isom, who will lead a group out of today's discussion, taking some of the input that you have provided to begin to talk about police and community relations, to begin to look specifically for some of these early wins, interim recommendations that we can make to begin to move toward some solutions in relatively short order. And he will present back to the commission. On next week, we will begin to focus on municipal policing. And so as we have prepared, Rich and I have a couple of things we just wanted to note as framing for that going forward. We're clear that over the last 120 days and before, a significant amount of information and reports have been published regarding compliance with current state statutes regarding the collection of traffic fine revenue by municipalities in the St. Louis region. You've heard some of that again tonight. The information shows that excessive traffic fines are being collected from citizens throughout the region, and that some municipalities are out of compliance with current state law. That being said, the commission has received reports, and they have been distributed to all commissioners, showing that by disproportionate stopping, charging, and fining of poor people and minorities, by closing the courts to the public, and by incarcerating people for failure to pay fines, these policies unintentionally push poor people further into poverty, preventing those impacted from accessing housing, treatment, and jobs they need to regain stability in their lives.
So as we have talked about this together and shared this information, we thought it was important for us to say to you that the Commission will be hearing at its next meeting from citizens who've been impacted by these predatory practices, from those who've researched the implications of these practices, and we'll be seeking short and long-term change that will address these practices that place so many of our citizens at risk. So in the near term, we are calling tonight, and we will call publicly with this statement, upon elected officials in St. Louis area municipalities that have been conducting these practices, particularly those that are in violation of state law, to take steps immediately to move to compliance and to cease the predatory practices of preying on citizens, particularly the most vulnerable, with excessive traffic fine enforcement. We also call upon state officials with authority to pursue enforcement actions against entities in violation of state law to review carefully the information regarding compliance with the law by municipality and to take immediate appropriate action. So we believe there are a number of short and long-term implications of these practices, so the Commission will establish a working group after we hear from the community and we hear from folks next week about this data to develop plans and recommendations that will provide a path out of these practices and ultimately to higher quality and more community-oriented policing in these areas and more efficient delivery of municipal services. So we thought it was important for us to share this with you tonight because it is the precursor to next week's meeting, but frankly we couldn't let the fact that there are current violations of state law from these predatory practices stand without calling it out, calling it for what it is, and calling on the press and elected officials to make this public so that we shine a bright light on what's going on here. And so on behalf of, as co-chairs, we thought it was important to make that statement and share that with you tonight. Let me just say, in building on Starsky's earlier comment, and we're going to finish here and then leave, thank you for the engagement around the room. I got to 2 of the groups, the commissioners got to all of the groups, and we tried to listen carefully. We have this data on the walls. We have 31 pages of data from the first meeting. We will have another set of data from this meeting. It will all be published on the website. This is all transparent. We want you to see everything that you're saying. I want to thank the law enforcement officials, county leadership were in each group, and several city folks were in each group. It's important for them to hear, and I appreciate them being here and staying to make sure that they did that. One of the things is Starsky and I think about gratitude, and we think about doing this work together as co-chairs and with you all as a community and with our fellow commissioners here, is we know we need to be in the business of seeing real needs and understanding them, of seeing real inequities and real injustice through all of this challenge, and through all of this we need to see that, and we need to find ways to love and support each other through that. We need to find ways to love and support those who are charged with the very difficult task of protecting us, and finding ways that we can show them that we love and support them at the same time we talk as a community about what needs to change. And we need to find ways mostly to support those who are struggling, and those who are struggling to be heard, those that are most directly impacted in our community. We need to find hope through this and positive change, and that is our hope and that is our fervent prayer. Thank you all for being here. We hope you have a great evening.